can see most of the hillside has been cleared. There's not a lot of trees, and as the farm has been abandoned, you have more brush, shrub fields growing up, a younger forest where deer will be grazing growing up. And so what we have a lot in most of Vermont today, we have a very similar looking stage of forest. And so that's kind of why we lend ourselves to help. Another issue that we deal with a lot with private landowners when we're looking at forests, in addition to trying to manage and kind of disperse successional stages, is fragmentation. So this is a picture of an intact forest block, and I'm sure you're all familiar with things being fragmented as people come in and being developed, and that's a huge pressure here in Vermont. And so when we work with landowners, we try to work on a regional landscape scale, trying to keep intact forests connected and make it easier for animals to move through. So this is just another example. So does anyone know what that wildlife critter is? Yeah, it's a fisher, yeah. And so these guys, they need a lot of different types of habitat, but they also need it to be arranged on the landscape correctly. So, you see this large forest block with a lot of connectivity, and we see also different stages of succession on that in that range of the fisher. So he can use all the different types of habitat. So that's one thing that we do talk about quite a bit when we talk to landowners, is making sure there's different types of habitat available on your property. So this is quite often what we see when we go to different forests across the state. As you can see, these are two pictures I've taken on site visits. One is up near St. Albans in Franklin County, and one is down in Wells in Rutland County. We did a habitat walk there a couple weeks ago. And as you can see, the forest really doesn't look that great. It doesn't look that hospitable to animals. And this is because it's all in one age group. The forest hasn't really been managed in either of these areas yet. And so it's all kind of grown up at the same time. It doesn't offer a lot of habitat, a lot of cover, places for animals to eat. And so we work with a lot of landowners to talk about that as well. So we call that structural diversity. And so here's an example of a very diverse forest. It's got a lot of different places for all these different types of wildlife to inhabit. Scarlet tanagers will live up in the canopy of the trees. Got oven birds will nest right on the ground. There's lots of little coarse woody debris, logs, and stumps for a salamander to hang out in. And so this is what we try to encourage on people's property. So another issue that we deal with quite a bit, as I'm sure you're all aware, is invasive plants. And these are kind of bad news for quite a different number of reasons. One, they're invasive because they outcompete our native plants. So as the invasive plants take over, our native plants are diminished, and that means that our native insects are also diminished. A lot of these invasive plants aren't great habitat for native insects. They are great habitat for ticks, which is not a great thing. They are also not very nutritious for a lot of our bird species. As you're driving around now, I'm sure you're seeing all of the honeysuckle that's bright red with their berries, on the streets, and those look really tasty, but they're really poor nutrition for birds. It'd be basically like if we went out and just ate M&Ms all day. Not real great for us. And so it kind of harms bird populations in two ways, because birds would be spending all of their time eating these M&Ms and not getting any of their nutrition, and then they also, they're diuretics, so they can't absorb any of that nutrition in those berries, and they just poop it out, and that's how the seeds are spread. So we spend quite a bit of time talking about invasive plants.
Well, this picture actually is from Dorset as well, too. I took that picture, so just for some context.
And that's all Barbary in there. Big tick hotels. So to deal with kind of some of those things I've talked about, invasive plants, the lack of structural diversity, fragmentation, there's a lot of different resources that are available to private landowners. The Department of Fish and Wildlife, there's Travis and I, and like I said, our colleagues are available for any kind of assistance. We've also put out this really great landowner's guide that we can make available if you get a hold of us. It's got a lot of great information. about what you can do on your property and different animals. Here's a website here, ANR Atlas, which is a really great mapping tool. So it really helps. You can focus in on your property, you can zoom out, you can see all these different layers of what's surrounding your own property. Vermont Forest Parks and Recreation do a lot with private landowners as well. I'm sure a few of you are familiar with the current use or UVA program, enrolling your property in a forest management plan. We also have a bunch of great brochures that FPR has put out. It's called Cut with Confidence, and it's really geared to inform landowners on the benefits of doing cuts and how that can benefit wildlife, how that can benefit you economically, and just how to work with loggers and foresters. And so if you have any questions about that, please feel free to ask us too. Vermont Coverts is also a great organization that works directly with private landowners. They are not part of the government, but we work closely with them as partners. They're a peer-to-peer organization. They do a 3-day training. The next one's coming up in September at Kehoe over near Castleton. And I've got some brochures for that as well if you're interested. It's a really great program. I went through it. Travis has spoken at it.
Yep.
And it's a really great organization. They do a lot of trainings and workshops throughout the year.
And we're still looking for a few more people for this upcoming one as well.
Yeah, it's a really great experience.
Andrea?
Yep.
So I was just going to say, and I took it last September. I live in Shrewsbury.
That's right.
And if anybody wants to ask me about it too, you can. I'm happy to push it. It's
Right.
a wonderful program.
It's a great program and really good network of people that are all over the state. Audubon does a lot of different programs as well. They have a forest bird initiative. They can even send a biologist out to your property and tell you what kind of birds you have there and what kind of habitat would really benefit other birds to encourage different species on your property. Woods, Wildlife, and Warblers, again, is another program that kind of blends a bunch of different groups that we are a part of. And they'll also help send people out to your property and kind of give you some advice. And so I guess with that, I'll turn it over to Travis. He's going to talk about the NRCS EQIP programs. Yeah, pass the baton.
So how's everybody?
Good.
That's good. I've been all over the place. I've been to Manchester, I've been to Castleton, out here. So it's a whirlwind, and that's kind of how most of my days go. At least from the end of summer through to May. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about the EQIP program, NRCS, that we work in partnership with. Some of you have already heard this. I know a few people that I recognize here. But it's a great program just to try to give you some financial assistance to help do those different projects. Oops, that is the wrong way. So first of all, kind of like Andrea said, management is typically good for wildlife. With all of the aging forests that we have in Vermont, we don't have a lot of either end of the spectrum. We don't have a lot of that old growth forest, we don't have a lot of that young forest. We have a lot of stuff that's just kind of in the middle. It provides some level of habitat, but it doesn't provide the wide spectrum that we would like to see throughout the state. So any kind of typically active management is good for wildlife. It's good for your early successional species like the deer, your woodcock, also for your pollinators like the bees, which have had their struggles recently. And then now I'm just going to try to, I know that was kind of just an overview. I'm going to go through some of the most common practices that I deal with landowners through the program. So these are typically, when I go out to a property, these are things that come up quite frequently. So apple tree release is the first one. This releases the tree from competition, provides more direct sunlight, makes that tree not compete for space more, so it can put more into production, produce more apples. Apples are always up and down, as anybody knows, especially if you go pick apples year to year. But the hope is that if we open them up to light, and typically apple trees, even if they're dead, I've seen apple trees on their deathbed that we open up and they flourish. So it's a very good thing to do when you can. And anybody that hunts knows, if you have apple trees, it's always a good thing. Deer love them. In the same light, There's other mass-producing species, other mass trees, so to say. Our friends the bears really love certain trees especially, but all kinds of wildlife utilize the nuts, berries, seeds from all kinds of different species, from turkey and deer to bears. Without release, these trees, similar to apples, are not going to produce as much mass. They're not going to have as much health and as much bigger. It's a kind of a double-edged sword that we accomplish in regards to wildlife habitat, creating more food, and also picking those trees that have good health, good vigor, that are going to actually be potentially good timber and good quality trees for the future as well. So typically we release on 3 to 4 sides, except for beach. You want to avoid releasing on the southern side of the beach. Does anybody know why you don't want to release on the southern side of the beach? So if you release on the southern side of the beach, in the wintertime, the sun hits the snow, reflects off the snow. Beech has very thin bark. It warms up the side of the beech tree, and then it freezes again overnight, causes frost cracks, and can kill the tree. So anything with thin bark like that, you want to avoid any side that has direct sunlight like that. This is kind of just a diagram to show you kind of what we look at for trees when we're looking for trees to release. We want these co-dominant trees, or the CDs, ones that are kind of in the middle. They're fairly dominant in the canopy, but they're being crowded out by other trees. You can see a dominant tree here. It's got much more crown space. So you open it on 3 or 4 sides. Potentially, maybe here you had another tree that was a good mass producer, so you left that as well. You want to open up as much space at anything that's touching the canopy or that's within a few feet of the canopy, just to give it plenty of room to grow, plenty of room to produce mass. And these are some common trees. You're not going to see a whole lot of these up here, like red oak, white oak, bitternut hickory, shagbark hickory. You're probably not going to see too much of them, not holly. But black cherry, yellow birch, serviceberry, maple to an extent can sometimes be a little bit mass producer with the seeds. Up here, typically, when I come up in the mountains, we're looking at black cherry and yellow birch most of the time. Yellow birch, one somebody doesn't typically think of as a mass producer because you don't think of it as having nuts or berries, but the seeds, especially grouse, love to eat the seeds as well, little catkins. And this is kind of an example. This is a shagbark hickory that we released. This is another one. This guy's still touching him, but we left that alone. This is another hickory. This was done in West Haven just 7 months ago in January. Early successional habitat, like I said, we have a lot of that in mid-level forest. We don't have a lot of spectrum. One way that we create young forests is through patch cuts. And patch cuts are similar, or like this. It's kind of what it sounds like. It's a small scale, clear cut, basically. We leave different elements in those patch cuts, snags, which are standing dead trees for perches for birds, potentially roost trees for bat species, as well as good coarse woody material on the ground that provides some good, keeps moisture in the soil for amphibian species that may come back once the forest starts to grow back up, protects the soil as well, provides pathways for small mammals as well, good cover. So we do have a little bit more. It's not exactly a clear cut, but it's obviously very good for your early successional species. Lots of different birds use these areas. Deer love these areas because it's great browse areas and great cover. So it's a food source and a cover source for a lot of different species. It's another aspect of the habitat that a species may need in its range. So this is kind of what I was talking about, things that we leave. So these are 2 patch cuts. The first 2 were ones that my predecessor had done, so I don't know as much about them, but these are 2 patch cuts that I worked with landowners for. This one here is a 13-acre cut in Middletown, and this one's a 2.5-acre cut in Bennington. It's different, but you can see that they still have a lot of the same elements. They have these trees, these pine here, they look like they're still alive. They were girdled to create snags. This was just right after they were girdled. But you see you have the standing dead trees. You have lots of good coarse woody material. We do leave some live leaf trees as well, good mass producers, good seed trees for potential future for timber or for just general good And some of the areas to consider for this. Maybe a lot of you have seen something like this one with a lot of pine. It happens a lot more down the valley. Up here, sometimes you're going to get more of fir spruce forests that look like that. This was an area that was pasture way back in the day. It was abandoned. It's grown up into this real low quality, weevil, just kind of junk pine really that is all the same age class. It's not providing a good level of diversity, especially structural diversity like Andrea said. This is a lot of what we look for, and it also serves that dual purpose of creating good early successional habitat for wildlife, but also restarting a forest stand for good silvicultural purposes as well. Other types of areas, declining early successional hardwoods, so the species that we expect to grow up in these patch cuts, once they get to a certain age, they again kind of lose their value as that young forest. They become big, older trees that are not yet old growth, but they're beyond the point of being providing good cover, good structural diversity, and good browse and other types of food. And then poor quality northern hardwood stands, again, focused on that double-edged kind of timber, silviculture, as well as good wildlife habitat. So you can do both in the same breath. And then invasive plants. I should have got some more from up here, because actually I do have some from Mount Holly. I should have put some pictures of that in here. But this bottom picture is from Manchester, and this top picture is from Guilford. Different aspects. This one had a lot of control done, but still did have some left to do. Everything you can see there that's greenish yellow is all honeysuckle. There really wasn't anything else growing in the understory of this forest. And you can see it's all that standard same age class forest. There's nothing really good regenerating because these invasive plants have taken over the understory. This is a project in Guilford where I believe it was 23 acres of control was done. Mostly it was barberry. You can see all the little skeletons that were left after. This is shortly after it was completed. It was sprayed. It is very expensive typically to treat large areas for very difficult infestations of invasive plants. So those big, large buckthorns, big honeysuckles, very thick stands, stuff you can't really walk through or you wouldn't want to walk through. It becomes exponentially more expensive the more acreage you add on. So that's kind of where we come in to try to assist the landowners to provide some funding for that. Typically, that's going to involve herbicides to control, especially for the large area. But there are also other alternatives if it's not so far gone, basically. So there's mechanical and manual weeds as well. Typically, herbicide, though, is the way that it ends up being just because it's gone so far. But it's always a choice that a landowner needs to make themselves. And here's just a list of some of the most common invasive plants in Vermont, but there's more, as you can see at the end. This is just a list of some of them. You might be familiar with some of them. Honeysuckle, buckthorn, I see a lot up here. Barberry, I've seen here. Multiflora rose, Japanese knotweed, wild parsnip, also known as poison parsnip. You see on the sides of the road all the time. Really nasty stuff. You don't want to touch that. But some other ones, wild chervil, garlic mustard. You know, the list goes on and on and on. Typically, when I deal with these contracts, we're dealing with more of the woody species, the honeysuckles, buckthorns, barberries, but we do also help with those herbaceous species as well, like the chervil and the knotweed. Poison parsnip is one that doesn't really, I'm not going to say there's no hope, but it's not great. Mostly just hand pulling. I looked that up actually, because I had landowners ask me about it different times, and I looked up and I read a lot of different studies, and pretty much the most effective way to get rid of it is hand pulling, which nobody really wants to do. So pollinator habitat is another one. Delayed mowings, rotational mowings. Occasionally we do plantings for pollinators. This has become a big effort to try to focus on this, especially in these old field habitats. We haven't had a whole lot of this work completely done so far. We'd love to have more. I do have a few in Castleton where they're doing some rotational mowing, so they're going to mow one field 1 year, another the next year, and then come back in 2 years. So kind of let some of that area grow up, provide habitat for an area of the field that they don't necessarily need. It's a little bit wetter of a field. It also happens to border a large alder swamp, so it's great woodcock habitat as well too. So these, have multiple benefits, not just to pollinators, but also to birds and other species as well.
Hey, Travis?
Yep.
Could you talk a little bit about the bottleneck project? Does that fit in right here?
Andrea, I don't know if you would know more
Sure.
about that.
So the bobbling project it's run by UVM and a couple other partners in different states. And it's a project focused on grassland birds, bobolink, field sparrows, a couple other grassland, I think grasshopper sparrows. And basically it's an effort to have delayed mowing on large patches of grassland habitat.
So and the programs that I work with, we follow that same kind of guidelines from the bobbling project. So we wait till August 15th typically or later to mow. You can also do one in early May as well before the birds show up. But it's just to try to avoid that period when the birds are nesting there primarily.
And the bobbling project came out, I guess it was generated out of the idea that, as farmers delay mowings, they're going to get less hay off of their properties, and so the bobbling project will compensate them to maintain, the grass until the end of August when the birds are done fledging. So they get paid to maintain their grass, and it's been pretty successful in the Champlain Valley. I think up near Newport, up in the ag fields up there, there's been some success as well.
Yeah, the bottling project is focused on those very large areas. Sometimes there's small areas that they may or may not fit perfectly for them, but we still might be able to help with funding, especially for farmers that may lose income from that hay. There's a special category called delayed mowing with foregone income. And cap plans. So the main requirement for all of this work is that there's no requirement for acreage, but you have to have a forest management plan. So people with small lots typically look at that and they think, oh, well, then I'm not going to be able to do that. Well, fortunately, there is a category that offers funding for management plans. If you can find a forester who will write a plan for your woodlot, you can apply for a conservation activity plan, is what Nrcs calls it. It's a forest management plan. So there is funding for that. Forest management plan will be done by a licensed forester. Recently, Vermont implemented licensing for foresters just to protect the landowners. This is going to have different objectives, different management activities that you can do on your property. Many of you already probably may have a forest management plan as well, especially if you're in current use of EPA. So, now I get to go over the more tedious part of it. So EQIP is the program that we mostly utilize. There's another program that's new that I'll talk to you about a little bit. I don't really like it as much, but it's okay. EQIP is the Environmental Quality Incentive Program. There's a continuous sign-up, but all applications are ranked in different batches. So there's typically 3 batches for forestry and wildlife. One usually is in January, or ends in January, one in March, and then one in May. But you can sign up anytime, and your application will just be considered in the next batch. It's a cost share program, like I said, but it includes a lot of those practices that I just went over. A bunch more that are just less common, so I don't talk about them in presentations as much, but if they fit on your landscape, it might be something that we talk about when they come out. And it's a focus on non-commercial work. So with the EQIP program, any work that's done cutting-wise, whether it's a patch cut, mass tree release, there's also TSI, which is timber stand improvement, forest songbird work, all of it has to be pre-commercial work. we have standards that NRCS has laid out as to what they consider being commercial work. Goal there really is just so that there's not funding going to something that potentially could fund it itself through cutting. CSP is the other program, the Conservation Stewardship Program. It's a continuous sign-up as well. There's only one application deadline. It's typically in early February. It's a relatively new program. There's 70-some different practices. They're called enhancements in CSP instead. It's a caution program for landowners who've already done kind of good conservation work and want to do a little bit more, go above and beyond. It's been a little bit iffy so far, working through the different parts of it so far. It's a new program. As it goes, it'll get better. There's a large number of potential practices, like I said. It's 5-year contracts with an annual payment based upon acres. The minimum payment of $1,500 a year. That's based off the total of acres. So even if your acreage is less than what would come out to $1,500, it's a minimum of $1,500. It is designed to be more difficult to get into, because obviously they want to see that landowners have done good work already and don't have any major problems that need to be done through another program like ECO. So it's kind of that cherry on top, hence the last week. So yeah, that's it. It's a brief, kind of fast overview. I understand that, and it took me. It takes a long time to understand all these different programs and everything completely. So if you have any questions, we're here to ask.
Is anybody working with the solar people? Because there's all this nice tall grass and it's fenced in. And are they being asked not to mow until after August 15th?
I believe they are. That falls into kind of the Act 250 realm. So with development, you have to work with a different set of biologists, not us necessarily. So I don't know the ins and outs necessarily of what people are asking to do. I know they're definitely asking them to be more thoughtful about their development, because it does eat up a lot of grassland habitat. And so I would assume that mowing and creating pollinator habitat in those solar fields is a big priority. Yeah.
I don't know what grassland habitat you're talking about, because it's mowed
Right, well,
3-4 times and you just shake the heads off those little tiny birds.
right. Previously grassland habitat.
Okay.
So are all these programs you're talking about, they're statewide, they're available anywhere else?
Yep. Yeah, if you're in those 5 counties that I mentioned before, they'll get myself. If you're up north, you'll get Andrea or Dave. So kind of far up there.
And so what would we actually be asking for?
So if you, how much property do you guys own? Like
So one piece is 117 acres.
Okay, so yeah, we could come out and we could run through a whole number of, I guess the first thing when we come out to someone's property is we ask, what are your goals? What do you like to see on your land? What do you use it for? And then we kind of let you show us around the property, and we'll point out things that will work towards your objectives. And then, if it fits into some of these programs, we'll help recommend that. But basically, we'll come out for free, and we do answer whatever questions you want, basically.
So in general, we're a free resource to the public. If you're interested in habitat management, you can contact us. We'll work with you the best we can to fit you into our schedules at some point. Typically, that's easier for me in the middle of summer when there's different cutting restrictions and things like that than my busy seasons. But, we're this free resource here to come out, help landowners say, what's your goals, what do you want to do, work with you to incorporate that into an already existing management plan, and work with you to try to help them incorporate that. If you don't have a management plan yet, something like the CAP plan, just kind of give you a general overview of what's there, what might be your goals. go from there.
And at the end of the visit, you know, we send out a kind of a summary report of this is what we've talked about. These are things you can do to follow up on those. These are things that we will send you information on to follow up.
And there's no
So,
requirement that if I come out, that you gotta sign up for a program.
We have 10 acres, of which probably 8 acres are about mid-life forest, I guess you'd call it. Is that something that would fall within the category? How would you handle that?
yeah, well,
It's tiny.
Yeah, it's tougher. So like I said, technically we don't have any lower limit for those programs. The problem is, can you find a forester that'll write a management plan for 8 acres of forest? It's gonna be tough, probably. But the one thing that we can say is that we still are glad to come out and talk to you about any different potential options that we see on that land. There may not be a program that might fit. There may be. You never know. But it's something we can come out and provide some technical assistance to you as a landowner. Anyways.
I've been on a property that's less than 5 acres. You know, just a lot of it's even just pointing out what species are there and what wildlife uses that species. So yeah, we're happy to come out on any size property.
Just to follow up with that, there's a lot of small parcels, say less than 20 acres or so, but they're in the midst of huge tracts of land, and they could be in a key location. Are there opportunities to identify, there might be a few acres here where there was some certain habitat management done or certain structures put in or not put in.
Yeah.
It could be critical for that whole area. We've got small property ourselves, but a lot of stuff flows through our land.
Right.
From above us and below us. And what we do on our land affects what goes on in that whole wildlife.
Absolutely.
It seems like those small parcels, maybe that's why they don't have a lower limit, because some small parcels might be kind of a critical.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's kind of the thought. Again, like I said, it's technically no lower limit, but again, it still is required to have a forest management plan. So if you can find a qualified person to do that, then you fit into the potential cost share programs still, at least the ones that I work with. There are potentially maybe other avenues that you can work through as well. But like I said, we're always welcome to come out, or glad to come out and take a look at anything like that.
But what you ask about is something that's really important, because a lot of times what your neighbor has on his property will benefit wildlife that also use yours. In a lot of properties that are smaller parcels can't have all that different aspects of the same habitat. So it's great that you're asking that question. I know that there's a bunch of groups up in, well, there's a group of people up in like Enosburg area, Montgomery area, and they have created their own group called the Woodlot Program, and they operate on a bigger landscape scale than each of their own individual parcels. So there are programs that it gets a little more complicated. I can't explain it real eloquently here, but there are opportunities if you can work with your neighbors towards a common goal.
And I've worked with a couple of different folks. I work with a pair of neighbors in Dummerston that work together to do invasive plant control and then do different separate projects on their properties. So one was doing a master release, the other was doing a patch cut, just to try to do as much as they could across the landscape. I also have a few different properties in West Haven that I've worked with that was very large acreage, a couple of different farms with about 2,500 acres. But they've done patch cuts, they've done master release, they've done blade mowing, they're doing invasive control work as well. But they kind of space those out as neighbors and kind of decided where it would fit best in the landscape to have those key points, where it might be important to have those different areas.
If you already have a forest management plan, how does your recommendations work? Do I have to go back and get that revised based on your input, or?
Potentially. It depends on what's in the plan first, because sometimes a lot of these things may already be in there, they're just under a different name. Other times, potentially, if you sign up, say if you sign up for a program, you have set to do a patch cut maybe, and it's not included in the management plan. Everything that we look at from a wildlife standpoint and also from a silvicultural standpoint. So to make sure that that fits in, so that the county forester, when he gets that potentially amendment to the plan, if you need to do one, it makes sense to him. And silviculturally, it can be done. So we try to fit them together as best as we can. And in the case of if you have something that needs to be done, that you maybe want to do that we have seen that you could do, that's not included in the plan already, it's just a simple call to your forester. They write an amendment, it goes to the county forester, and they approve it. And I haven't had a single time when the county forester hasn't approved one.
Yeah, we work closely with both the county foresters and the consulting foresters, and part of my job is to really help get more wildlife management involved in the forest management plans. And so, yeah, it's definitely not an issue that you already have a forest plan.
So follow-up question. If you've already started doing like most of the things that you're talking about, are you still eligible for some assistance with that, or is that something that's too late?
It depends. It depends on how much. If you've done everything, then probably not. But typically folks haven't done anything. Typically, there's small things that maybe you haven't noticed, or you never would have thought about maybe necessarily. Usually, there's something still there. So I would say it's always good to have to come out, and we potentially might find something that could still fit.
And that might be a better candidate for the CSP.
Yeah, potentially. There's the other program as well. If you've already done a lot of work and you just want to go above and beyond a bit, potentially you fit better into that other program as well too. So there's a bunch of different ways that we can try to make things work as best we can.
Why would a forester have an issue with doing a smaller property, like around like 10 acres?
Because it doesn't make as much money. Basically, it's they gotta make a living as well too. So it's tough for them to do something that maybe takes a bunch of their time that doesn't make them as much money.
Yeah. Do you have any examples of USDA type work? You mentioned the $1,500 a year for whatever it was, 6, 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious, for one, once you commit to that, are you as a landowner susceptible to through that program? Like, what are you exposed to and signing up for, essentially?
Mm-hmm.
And then, I don't know, my property, we're most interested in hunting. My family and kids all like to hunt deer specifically. So we currently do a lot of things. Like try to do the apple tree release, we do food plots, we try to do a lot of things. So I'm curious more to that aspect where I'm already investing a lot of my time and money into trying to create this habitat, but if there's a program and resources available that might help me make that be more beneficial, or maybe I'm missing something, or there's something more I could be doing. Just curious on this whole process, I guess.
Yep. Yeah. So CSP is a little different. It's real brand new. The first real time was this year. It was 2017. So I don't have a great explanation to tell you how that might work out. What I can say is that the requirements typically are less under CSP than they are under EQIP, because we're coming in with if you qualify that, we're coming in with the idea that you're already somebody that is dedicated, you've already done good conservation work, you want to continue that conservation work. You're still held to a certain different set of practices that you want to do. They all have to be, with CSP, everything has to be completed by the end of the third year contract. You don't have to complete something every year of the contract, but you do have to have everything done by the end of that third year. With EQIP, it's a little bit different. It's strictly based on what practices you want to do. And they come up with a schedule of, we work with you, and the folks at Nrcs will work with you to say, here's the practices that you talked about with myself or with whomever else that will fit, that you could do, that you've been approved for. this is the schedule of operations that we think would fit well for that. You agree to that, sign a contract, you're responsible to get that work done by that period in the contract. Typically, EQIP contracts are 3 to 4 years. They typically have a practice in each year, but as long as you get at least one practice done within the first year, you have a little bit more leeway. It's a lot of paperwork, I'll tell you that. It's
A lot of
nothing,
what?
a lot of paperwork. You know, it's still a federal program to get the money. The federal government requires a lot of paperwork. You know, I'm not gonna.
That's only according to the, what is it called, Paper Reduction Act?
So it is a bit of a process. The thing that I try to do is I try to make it as easy as possible for different landowners. You know, I try to do as much of that upfront work so that basically you just have to review things and sign things. You know, that's kind of our job is to make the process a little easier. We provide the technical assistance and the idea of what can be done, but we also want to help you through the process as much as we can. You know, there's only so much I can control that the NRCS needs you to do. The one requirement, which typically I don't think I've ever seen, well, I've seen one person come up against, but that was a weird story. The one requirement that everybody typically laughs at, but it is a requirement, that you can't make more than $900,000 in 3 years. So I don't think you have to worry about that one. Sometimes we might have somebody that applies for something like that and endorse it.
Is that an annual number or collective?
Collective.
Oh.
Yeah, 3-year period, can't make more than $900,000. And that's more because there's farms that make that much money or more in the Midwest, you know, those big factory farms. Because NRCS is first an agricultural organization, and the forestry and wildlife work is tied into that. There's different requirements for different practices. It's all laid out in the plan. I write a plan every time somebody's approved. I write out everything that's required, any cutting restrictions they have to follow regarding endangered bats and birds and other things like that. Typically, I work closely with the foresters to do a lot of that stuff. You know, it's a process, but like I said, we try to make it as easy as possible and as simple as possible. And everything that you're responsible for is laid out before you sign it, and you're not attached to anything or have to do anything until you sign the contract. And if you don't, and typically sometimes too, even if you get a contract, but maybe something happens and you can't do the work anymore, and you haven't done anything yet already, it's pretty easy to just delete that contract and say, you're okay. So there's different levels of things. As long as you stay on track, it's usually fine.
We're in use value, and I asked our forester once, could I just conserve a section of, you know, not log it? And my understanding was that use value is a sustainable forestry program, and actually you have to harvest. And so the question I have, if you become involved with your programs, and agree to do something for wildlife, could that supersede one of our lots, sublots, and say, okay, this is now set aside, and you will not be logging this in perpetuity?
Yeah, so there's a couple different categories under UVA. So there's the productive forest land category, and that also includes significant wildlife habitat. So that's one option. There's also it's basically called ecologically sensitive treatment areas, and those have to be designated as, you know, important natural communities, vernal pools, rare, threatened, or endangered species occurs. There's different categories or different qualifications that could put you in a category that you don't have to follow a strict timber production guideline. So, as I mentioned before, I'm working with the county foresters and with consulting foresters to incorporate more wildlife management into forest plans. UVA is it was designed to keep working lands working and keeping the forest economy producing forest products. But it's also been designed to prolong the ecological health of the forests of Vermont. And so I think there is ways that we can work, if wildlife habitat is an objective of yours, we could work that out together and figure out which wildlife you're talking about, and we could manage that way. I can't say that they would allow you not to ever harvest anything ever, but you can do it at a reduced production scale as long as it meets objectives for both the tax department, Forest Parks and Rec, and wildlife.
So, you talked about fields and mowing and logging. What about water? What about ponds, streams, brooks, wetlands?
Yep.
How's that figure in?
Yeah, so actually, again, these are the most common practices. I actually do have a few aquatic organism passage projects, which have been involved. They're typically more involved than they usually have with Forest Service and private landowners and all kinds of different people involved, carbon limited, that type of thing. But they involve removing old culverts where fish patches would be good, putting in new ones. Water quality is always the utmost importance. You're required to follow AMPs, accepted management practices, for any forestry work that's done. That's designed to protect soil, protect water quality, erosion. Wetlands are something that we don't necessarily have a cost share program to help in regards to that, but we do typically do sometimes do invasive control in and around wetland areas in conjunction with an approval from the DEC with the Woodlot Program, just to try to restore the natural balance and natural communities of wetland areas. But there's not a whole lot of different programs directly related to that.
There are some, like riparian area, there's riparian area habitat enhancement.
Yeah, so there's riparian plantings, like I said, the aquatic organism passage. It's just not something that's been worked into directly with the programs that I work with partnership with Nrcs quite as much so far. But it's always soil quality and water quality are all kind of wrapped up in the requirements of the state already, and you're bound to follow those requirements regardless of whether you're working with us or by yourself or anybody.
I'd like to thank you, Andrea, and you, Travis, for coming out to share the information with us tonight. I'd like to remind everyone here that at the table in the back, there's a lot of information. There's a business card for Andrea, a business card for Travis, a sign-up sheet for for walkthrough if you want that for your property. And remember the Mount Holly Conservation Trust, we are interested in conserving, helping people conserve, putting them in contact with other organizations to maintain that stewardship. As Bridget had pointed out, possibly amalgamating parcels of land or landowners for a common purpose. I think we mentioned that when we were talking. So sometimes if you're aware of a piece of land that might be on the market that might fit into something in the way of, just for example, a bear corridor, those are the types of things that maybe we can try to work with fundraising and have some of that come to fruition. Again, our name is the Mount Holly Conservation Trust, so whatever we can do to maintain our landscape and help conserve land is what we want to do. And again, you guys, thanks so much for being here, and if anybody wants to, I guess there's not much up there.